My name is Lena Brooks, and I thought I understood family. At 28, I had built a life for myself in a quiet town far from the bustling estate my family called home. For years, I had distanced myself from them, and honestly, I never thought much about it. My relationship with my father had always been strained, and my brother James was the golden child, always at the center of everything. So, when I received an unexpected invitation to my father's 65th birthday party, I was surprised but didn't hesitate. We hadn't spoken much in the past few years, and it had been even longer since I had seen him. But when he called, I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I booked a flight, and with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, made my way back to the family home. When I arrived, the grand house hit me like a wave of memories I had long since buried. The high ceilings, the extravagant decor, the long tables filled with food. It was all so familiar, yet suffocating. The house, once a symbol of the success my father had worked so hard for, now felt like a hollow shell. I could hear the polite chatter of distant relatives' faces I barely recognized, and the flicker of candles casting shadows across the room. The scene looked like something out of a magazine, a picture-perfect family gathering. But it felt wrong. I felt out of place, like I didn't belong, like an outsider who had wandered into someone else's life. As I stood by the buffet table, pretending to enjoy a cheese platter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. James was there, making small talk, always the charmer, never the one to rock the boat. We hadn't had a real conversation in years, and in that moment, I realized just how much distance had grown between us all. The evening wore on, and I found myself trying to shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. My father, once the center of attention, was wheeled into the room, looking almost too polished. His usual gruff demeanor had softened with age, and though he looked sharp in his favorite suit, there was something unnerving about the way he seemed distant, as if he were lost in thought or somewhere far away. The family clapped as he entered, and my mother, Catherine, wiped away a tear, her smile bright but strained. She looked so proud of him, and for a moment I felt like a stranger in my own family. I tried to get his attention, waving from across the room, but when our eyes met, he didn't react. His gaze was vacant, and he didn't return the wave. I told myself it was just his age, but the pit in my stomach grew. Something wasn't right. I excused myself to grab a drink, hoping the cold glass of wine would calm my nerves. As I took a sip, I felt a tug of discomfort, a sense that I was witnessing something more than just a party, more than just an aging man in a chair. This wasn't just a celebration, it felt like a performance, a carefully crafted act for the sake of appearances. My mother leaned in then, as though sensing my discomfort. "He doesn't talk much anymore," she whispered, her voice shaking ever so slightly. "It's hard for him." I nodded, pretending to understand, but the words hit me strangely, like an answer to a question I hadn't asked. I had known that my father was getting older, but this felt different, distant, like a facade was being maintained, and I was left on the outside, looking in. That's when I first started to wonder, who was really in that chair? I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. But the more I watched my father, the more uncomfortable I became. The way he sat in that chair, almost motionless, his hands resting stiffly on the armrests, didn't look natural. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I glanced around the room, trying to focus on the party, on the faces of the people I hadn't seen in years, but they all seemed too polite, too rehearsed. My mother raised her glass for a toast, her voice quivering as she spoke. "Here's to 65 years of life, love, and the wisdom of family," she said, and the guests clapped and cheered, their reactions almost too synchronized. A few people wiped their eyes, but there was a forced sincerity to it all. I looked back at my father, who hadn't moved a muscle, his expression still distant. My chest tightened. Was I imagining things? I leaned in toward Aaron, my husband, standing beside me. He had been quietly watching the whole scene, his face calm, but his eyes never left my father. I nudged him gently and asked, "What's wrong?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another sip of his drink, still fixated on my father. Finally, he leaned in closer, his voice low and steady. "Get your bag. We're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I froze for a moment, Not sure if I was hearing him right. Are you serious? I whispered back, still hoping this was just some overblown reaction. But Aaron's eyes never wavered, and his calmness only deepened the unease creeping through me. He didn't look like he was joking. He looked like he was waiting for something to happen, and I had no idea what. Trust me, he said quietly. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just paranoia. Something was very, very wrong. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I stood there, frozen, trying to process what Aaron had just said. My mind raced with questions. What was going on? Why did Aaron seem so sure that something was wrong? We had just arrived, and everything seemed normal. Or at least, that's what I had convinced myself. I glanced at my father once more, his face expressionless, his eyes staring off into the distance like he was somewhere far away. The sense of disconnection between us felt sharper now. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. Aaron, noticing my hesitation, didn't wait for me to catch up. He started moving toward the back door, his pace steady and purposeful. It felt like we were in some kind of spy thriller, sneaking out under the cover of night. But the tension I felt wasn't cinematic. It was real, palpable, gnawing at me. I stood there for a moment longer, looking around the room. No one seemed to notice our exit, too wrapped up in their own conversations and polite laughter. I knew I should feel relieved to leave, but the nagging feeling in my gut only grew. I followed Aaron through the house, my mind spinning with possibilities, none of them good. Once we were outside, I felt the cool air hit me like a shock, grounding me a little. But I still couldn't understand why I felt this way. Why did I have this growing certainty that something was terribly wrong? When we got to the car, Aaron unlocked the door for me, his movements deliberate. He got in beside me and without saying a word, locked the doors. He stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel. It was then that he finally spoke. "That man in there is not your father," he said flatly. The words didn't register at first. I turned to him, confused. "What do you mean? Of course it's him." Aaron didn't look at me. His voice was firm. "It's not him, Lena. I'm sure of it." I stared at Aaron, my mind trying to make sense of his words, but nothing was clicking. "What do you mean it's not him?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "How can it not be him? That's—" I stopped myself, realizing how ridiculous I sounded. But Aaron's calm demeanor didn't waver. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. There was no hint of doubt in his voice, no sign that he was joking or overreacting. This wasn't just some casual comment. He was serious. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. "What are you talking about, Aaron?" I repeated, now desperate for some kind of explanation. He took a deep breath, then finally turned his gaze to me, his eyes intense. "It's his ears, Lena," he said, his voice low but certain. I noticed the minute I saw him, his ears are different. And his posture, the way he sat in that chair, it wasn't him. I know it wasn't. I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "Ears?" I whispered, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and fear. Could something so small really make a difference? But I realized Aaron wasn't the type to get fixated on trivial details. If he said it was different, it meant something. "I don't know how to explain it, but I know what I saw. It wasn't him," he said again, his voice steady despite the tension between us. My heart was hammering in my chest now, a cold sweat prickling on my skin. The thought that the man in the wheelchair, my father, the man I had barely spoken to in years, wasn't really him made my stomach drop. Who was it then? My mind raced. I looked back at the house, but we were already too far gone. My mind was spinning, trying to put the pieces together, but I couldn't. The questions were too many, and the answers seemed impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about what Aaron had said. His calm certainty felt like a cold slap, but my mind refused to process it. My father had looked like my father, hadn't he? The suit, the hair, the smile. Sure, it was distant and robotic, but he'd always been that way. Hadn't he? I tried to reason with myself, telling myself this was just my overactive imagination. But there was that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, growing with every passing second. What if Aaron was right? What if that man in the wheelchair wasn't my father? I replayed the scene at the party in my mind. I couldn't help but remember how detached my father had seemed, how every gesture from him felt rehearsed, like he was trying to fit into a role he no longer knew. But still, his face, his clothes, his presence, everything had screamed, my father. hadn't it? But something inside me refused to accept it, like my brain couldn't process the reality that was right in front of me. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of Aaron's words hanging in the air between us. I glanced out the window, trying to calm my nerves, but the images kept flashing back. The way my father sat motionless, the strange emptiness in his eyes, the way everyone around him had acted like it was all normal. The more I thought about it, the less it seemed like a coincidence. Something was wrong. Eventually, I broke the silence, my voice shaky. What if you're right? What if he's really gone? I asked, the thought finally crashing through my mental barriers. But why hide it? Why go this far? Aaron sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. I don't know, Lena, but we need to find out. There's more going on here than we're being told. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. Where was my father? Where had he gone? And who was that man in the chair pretending to be him? The questions swirled around my mind, each one more desperate than the last. Where was my father? Why had my mother, my brother, and the rest of the family been hiding his death? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I didn't know, how many secrets had been kept from me. I felt like a fool, sitting there with Aaron, my mind racing, wondering how long they had been lying to me, pretending everything was normal. How could they do this? I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and dialed the police. I didn't know exactly what to say, but I knew I had to speak up. I think something's wrong, I said when the officer picked up, my voice trembling. I think my father's been replaced. I'm at his house now, and there's a man here claiming to be him. He's in a wheelchair, but something's off. I think he's been dead for years, and I need you to check it out. I hung up before they could ask more questions, my mind spinning. I had no idea if they would believe me, if they would think I was overreacting. But I couldn't stay quiet any longer. The police arrived sooner than I expected, two plainclothes officers walking up the front steps of the house like they were delivering a package, their expressions calm but unreadable. I stayed in the car, staring at the house, unable to move. Aaron was quiet beside me, his eyes scanning the house too, watching the officers as they spoke to my mother. I watched her face change, first confusion, then defensiveness, her lips moving quickly, hands gesturing as if she were trying to explain away everything. It felt like I was watching a scene unfold that I should have known, but didn't. And then the officer approached the man in the wheelchair. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but his silence was deafening. What was going on? I wanted to run inside, confront them, demand answers. But I stayed in the car, frozen, as the world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. The tension in the air was suffocating as I watched the officers interact with my family. It was like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I couldn't tell which. The world around me had become surreal, every detail heightened in its absurdity. I watched my mother argue with one of the officers, her words fast and defensive, her body language tense. She kept shaking her head, eyes darting as if she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. The officer didn't seem fazed by her outbursts, his face an unreadable mask, but I could see the unease creeping into the way the others in the room moved. It was as if everyone knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. I turned to Aaron, who was still staring ahead, his face set in stone. I wanted to ask him what he thought, what he was feeling, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, a coldness settling in my chest. I had never felt more isolated in my life. This wasn't just a family secret. This was a betrayal, a twisting of everything I thought I knew about my own history. My father had always been distant, yes, but he was my father. How could they keep something so monumental from me? The officers moved on to the man in the wheelchair. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw them pull out a badge and ask for ID. I tried to make sense of it, my thoughts scrambled in the chaos of the moment. This wasn't just about a fake birthday party. It wasn't just about my father's death. It was something far darker. And the longer I waited, the more I felt like I was falling deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. Finally, one of the officers walked over to the car, his steps slow and deliberate. He was holding something, but I couldn't tell what it was. I braced myself. My heart pounded in my chest, the truth hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. The officer's footsteps felt like they were echoing in my ears, growing louder with each passing second. My breath caught in my throat as he approached the car, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a physical force. I barely noticed when Aaron shifted beside me, his hand resting on the door handle, ready to open it. I couldn't move, couldn't look away from the officer's steady, measured steps. His face remained calm, but his eyes were something else. There was something he wasn't saying. When he reached the car, he didn't immediately speak. He just stood there for a moment, his gaze lingering on me as if weighing my every reaction. Then, without warning, he spoke, his voice low but clear. "We've confirmed some details, ma'am. The man you saw in there, he's not your father." The world tilted, and I swear I heard a buzzing in my ears. I felt like I couldn't breathe. What? The words didn't register at first. The man I had been watching, the one who was supposed to be my father, was someone else entirely. I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of it, but the officer's words didn't line up with what I had known my entire life. How could it not be him? "The family claims your father passed away 3 years ago," the officer continued, his voice steady but distant. "They've been hiding his death. The man you saw earlier was an imposter, likely brought in to maintain the appearance of your father still being alive." I felt the air leave my lungs. 3 years. My father had been dead for 3 years, and no one had told me. No one had said a word. All the calls, all the birthday cards, the attempts to reconnect, all of it had been pointless. I was left in the dark while they pretended, while they manipulated and lied. My hands went cold, and the reality of it all sank in like a stone. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a betrayal so deep, so cruel, that I couldn't even begin to understand it. The officer paused, waiting for me to process, and I felt every second stretch, every minute a heavy weight on my chest. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The officer's words hung in the air, suffocating me. 3 years, I whispered, almost to myself. My brain couldn't process it. 3 years. I had been sending cards, making calls, trying to reach out, believing my father just grown distant with age. But no, he had been gone, buried, and the family had kept up the lie for 3 long years. The implications of it all were too much to bear. I felt my chest tighten, my hands cold and trembling in my lap. I wasn't sure if I was about to cry, scream, or just collapse. The officer took a small step back, his face still neutral, but with a hint of empathy in his eyes. "We've started an investigation. We'll be looking into the circumstances surrounding his death and the actions of your family," he said, his tone calm, but I could hear the gravity in his words. "For now, you should know that the man in the wheelchair was not your father. We're working on confirming everything." I nodded numbly, my mind too overwhelmed to fully process the weight of the investigation. It wasn't just about my father's death anymore. It was about the lies, the deception, and the cold indifference of my own family. Why? Why would they do this to me? To him? I felt like I was drowning in questions with no answers. As the officer walked away, my body felt heavy, as if the truth had physically worn me down. I glanced over at Aaron, who hadn't said a word since the officer arrived. His face was just as hard as mine, but I could tell he was just as shaken. "Where is he, Aaron?" I asked softly, my voice breaking. "Where's my father?" He didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. None of us could. All we had now were more questions than we had ever had before, and the answers, I feared, might be even worse than the silence we were left with. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, and sometimes the truth we believe in can be shattered in an instant. The story of Lena's journey reminds us of the importance of trusting our instincts and questioning what seems off, even when it's uncomfortable. Family, while often a source of love and support, can also be a source of deep pain and betrayal. It's essential to recognize that truth and transparency are vital in relationships. Without them, the foundation of trust crumbles. Lena's story also teaches us the value of self-worth and understanding that, even when others fail us, we are not defined by their actions. Never settle for false narratives, whether in family, work, or friendships. If something doesn't feel right, it's worth investigating, no matter how difficult it may seem. Furthermore, we must learn to let go of toxic relationships, even when the connection is blood. In the end, healing comes from within. Don't be afraid to seek out the truth, even if it leads to painful revelations. It may be hard, but facing reality is often the only way to reclaim your life and move forward with strength, clarity, and authenticity.